Welcome to Fear Spiral, the place where true horror stories come alive. Here, we explore real-life encounters that will make your skin crawl, your heart race, and your mind question reality. From abandoned cabins and empty highways to dorm rooms that whisper and elevators that trap, you'll witness the terrifying moments that happen to ordinary people on cold, lonely nights. Tonight we bring you 10 spine-chilling December night horror stories. You'll see shadowy figures staring through windows, roads that vanish without a trace, hitchhikers who disappear, and the haunting sounds that echo through forests, apartments, and gas stations, with every creak, whisper, and shadow designed to feel real. Because sometimes, the scariest things aren't made up. So turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and join us. If you dare. This is Fear Spiral, and tonight, fear comes alive. The man at my window. I've always lived alone, and I've grown used to the comforting hum of silence at night. But December 14th changed that. I was living in a small townhouse on the outskirts of Chicago, the kind of neighborhood where the streets are quiet and neighbors keep to themselves. That night, I went to bed around midnight, exhausted from a long day at work. My room was dimly lit by the faint glow of a streetlight outside, and I had my headphones on, scrolling through a few late-night videos. The winter air had seeped into the house, making the wooden floorboards slightly cold under my feet whenever I got up. Around 12:45 a.m., I woke to a faint tapping sound at my bedroom window. I assumed it was just the wind playing tricks, or maybe a branch hitting the glass. I tried to ignore it, telling myself my imagination was exaggerating the noise. But then, it came again. Tap, tap, tap. And it was slow, deliberate, unlike anything the wind would make. My heart skipped a beat. The window was at the far end of my room, and I could see the curtain move slightly. I froze. My mind started racing with possibilities, none of which were comforting. At first, I told myself it was probably just an animal. Chicago isn't exactly a wildlife hotspot, but I figured maybe a squirrel or raccoon had somehow climbed up. Still, something didn't feel right. The taps became more consistent, like someone was drumming their fingers on the glass in a pattern. I tried to focus, listening carefully, but each tap made the room feel colder, heavier, as if the very air was pressing down on me. I slowly got out of bed, my feet touching the cold floor, heart pounding. I whispered, "Who's there?" But the silence that followed was deafening. I crept toward the window, trying to peek through the curtain without revealing myself. That's when I saw it, a shadow, tall and broad, standing perfectly still outside. My stomach dropped. I could barely breathe. The figure didn't move. It just stood there staring. I didn't see any features clearly, but the posture, the stillness, and the timing made my pulse hammer painfully in my ears. I backed away slightly, considering my options. Should I call the police? Should I confront whoever or whatever it was? My instincts screamed to lock the doors and hide, but a part of me was paralyzed with fear, unable to look away. Then the shadow shifted slightly, enough for me to catch the silhouette of a man, tall, heavyset, his hands pressed against the glass. I could see the faint outline of his face featureless in the dim light, but it was definitely watching me. The tapping stopped suddenly, replaced by a slow, almost deliberate scratching at the bottom of the window. I froze, staring. It sounded like long fingernails dragging along the wood of the sill. I backed away, my hands shaking, and grabbed my phone. I dialed 911, my voice shaking so badly I could barely get the words out. "There's someone outside my window," I whispered, trying to keep calm. Before the operator could answer, I heard a sudden scraping noise above me, like a weight being dragged across the roof. The shadow seemed to dissolve for a moment, only to reappear closer to the edge of the window, as if it had moved silently across the patio. I froze, staring at the glass, certain my eyes were deceiving me. My brain was screaming at me to hide, to get out, to do something, anything, but I couldn't move. Then the shadow turned, slowly, methodically, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I felt as though it was looking straight into my soul. Then, as abruptly as it had appeared, it was gone. I was alone, the window cold and still. The tapping and scratching ceased entirely. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in my bed, clutching my phone, listening for any sound, breathing, movement, even the faintest footstep. At around 3 a.m., I finally forced myself to drift into a shallow sleep, only to wake hours later to the morning light streaming through the window. I went outside to check. The patio was damp from the December frost, but there were footprints, muddy, human-sized, leading from the side of the house to the window and then disappearing. There was no way they had come from anywhere nearby without crossing the yard. I never found out who or what it was. My neighbors didn't report seeing anyone. The police came, but they said there was nothing unusual, no signs of forced entry, no prints that matched any records. I changed my locks, reinforced the window, and installed cameras, but it didn't feel like protection. Every December night since, I check my window before going to bed. Sometimes I swear I see a shadow at the edge of the curtain, lingering for just a moment too long. Even now I can't shake the memory, the way it stood there, silent, watching. I have no explanation. I have no answers. And every December, when the wind taps against my window and the house is quiet, I feel that same icy dread settle into my chest, reminding me that some things are patient, and some things wait for the perfect night. The road that disappeared was December 22nd, and the snow had been falling all evening. I was driving back from my friend's cabin in northern Minnesota. Around 2:30 a.m., the roads were practically empty, just me and the occasional snowplow. In the distance, the headlights cutting through the thick, almost blinding snowfall. I had spent the weekend with friends, laughing, drinking hot cocoa by the fireplace, and playing board games. I was exhausted, ready to get home, slip into my warm apartment, and finally sleep. I relied heavily on Google Maps, especially in these remote areas where familiar landmarks are few and far between. But as I followed the suggested route, I realized something was off. The road I was supposed to take had vanished. The asphalt ended abruptly, replaced by a dense, unplowed forest path that wasn't supposed to exist. I blinked at the screen, thinking it was a glitch, and pulled over briefly. My breath fogged the windshield as I tried to get a signal. The GPS still insisted I continue, even though the path ahead was nothing but a narrow trail lined with thick pines, snow piled high on either side. I laughed nervously to myself, thinking, okay, this is weird. Probably just a mapping error. But when I drove forward, the trees seemed to close in, their skeletal branches reaching across the road like fingers. The crunch of the snow under my tires echoed in the silence of the night. I switched off the music, wanting to hear better, and that's when I noticed it. Faint shapes moving between the trees. At first, I told myself it was just the wind tossing branches or maybe a deer, but they were too deliberate, too human-shaped. Hairs on my neck stood up, and my pulse quickened. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror and froze. There were headlights following me, except there was no other vehicle. The lights were too bright, too close, yet I couldn't hear an engine. My foot pressed harder on the accelerator, snow spraying from the tires, but the lights mirrored every movement I made. I checked my mirrors obsessively, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the storm, but the lights stayed, following relentlessly. Then I saw it. At the edge of the light's reach, a person or something that resembled a person was standing. In the snow, pale, hunched, staring directly at me. I slammed on the brakes instinctively, and the figure vanished, leaving nothing but the crunching snow and the roar of my own panic. My chest felt like it was going to burst, and my hands were slick with sweat. I considered turning back, but the trail behind me looked exactly the same, just as shadowed, just as endless. I didn't recognize the terrain at all. Every tree, every snowdrift looked like it was watching me, closing in. I muttered to myself, just keep going, just keep going. And I did, my headlights barely illuminating the narrow path ahead. The snow now fell faster, heavier, almost suffocating. My visibility was limited, and every time I glanced to the sides, I felt like something was moving just out of sight, keeping pace with me. Around 3 a.m., my exhaustion and fear collided. I caught glimpses of figures, sometimes two, sometimes three, standing motionless among the trees. They didn't move, didn't blink, just watched. And always, in the corner of my vision, those lights hovered, following me as I twisted along the trail. I tried to shake the terror, telling myself it was hallucination from lack of sleep and the cold. But my instinct screamed otherwise. I remembered a story my grandfather used to tell me about lost roads in northern forest staleys, of people disappearing, of travelers being lured into snow-drenched traps by unseen forces. I scoffed at those stories as a kid, but now my mind clung to them desperately, hoping for some explanation that wasn't the obvious. I was being watched, possibly hunted. By 3:15 a.m., I reached a clearing. The GPS finally updated, showing a road. I recognized. My relief was palpable, but it didn't last long. In the rearview mirror, the lights were still there, floating just at the tree line, almost waiting. I pressed the accelerator and didn't dare look back. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly they ached, and I felt the heat in my chest from both fear and adrenaline. When I finally reached the first gas station off the highway at 3:45 a.m., the fluorescent lights inside felt blindingly safe. I parked and ran inside, shaking, gasping for air. The attendant looked up from behind the counter and asked if I was okay. I told him about the road, the lights, the figures in the trees. He listened quietly, then said, "You're lucky to be out of there. That stretch has had incidents before. People get lost. Sometimes they never come back." I stared at him, heart still racing. "What kind of incidents?" I asked. He shook his head. "Just unexplained disappearances. Folks wandering off into the snow. No traces, nothing on the maps. Happens more in December than any other month." I paid for some coffee, still trembling, and left immediately. Every sound of the wind and the crunch of the tires on the pavement set my nerves on edge. I kept glancing at the darkened tree line, half expecting to see the pale figures or those lights following me again. I got home around 5 a.m., exhausted and shaking. I tried to convince myself it was all stress, fatigue, and snow-induced hallucination. But in the following weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Maps of the area confirmed what I had feared. The road I had driven on didn't exist. There were old logging trails nearby, but nothing that matched the path I took. It was as if I had been led into a place that wasn't meant to be on any map. Months later, I still avoid driving that way. Every December, when snow starts to fall and the nights grow long, I can't help but feel that same cold dread in my chest, the sensation that something is watching, waiting, just beyond the tree line. I've told friends about it, but they all laugh it off. They say I'm imagining things, but I know what I saw. And every time I close my eyes in winter, I see those lights floating just at the edge of the forest, patient and unblinking, waiting for the next traveler who isn't supposed to be there. Even now, I sometimes dream I'm back on that trail. Snow falling thick and fast, headlights ahead and behind, the sound of crunching steps in the silence, and that overwhelming feeling of being followed, of being trapped in a road that doesn't exist and may never have. The voice in the dorm never thought I'd be the type of person to be scared in my own dorm. I always considered myself rational, logical, someone who didn't believe in the paranormal or anything supernatural. But December of my second year at college completely shattered that belief. It started innocuously enough, a late night at the library. As I often did, I had been studying for an upcoming exam until around 1:30 a.m. The quiet of the empty library, broken only by the soft hum of the fluorescent lights and the scratch of my pen on paper. By the time I left, the sky was black and the temperature had dropped well below freezing. My dorm was a large building on campus, 5 floors with hundreds of students, and usually, even late at night, there was a hum of life voices, footsteps, doors opening and closing. But that night, the hallways were silent, eerily so. I made my way back to my floor, my boots clicking against the linoleum, and I felt a strange sense of unease settle over me. It wasn't the cold. It wasn't the darkness. Something felt off. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone else walking behind me, but the hallway was empty. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long, jittery shadows that seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally along the walls. As I approached my door, I heard it, a whisper. "Hey, are you alone?" My steps froze. I tried to dismiss it as my imagination, maybe my mind playing tricks after hours of studying in silence. But the whisper came again, slightly closer, slightly sharper. "Hey, are you alone?" My heart started to pound. I spun around, peering down the hallway. Nothing. Just the cold, empty corridor stretching into darkness. I called out, my voice trembling slightly. "Yes, who's there?" Silence. The kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes your blood run cold. I felt a movement behind me, soft, dragging footsteps, slow and deliberate. I didn't dare turn around. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. The footsteps mirrored mine perfectly as I crept toward my door. My keys trembled in my hand. I whispered a desperate, "Please, just go away," hoping against hope that it was someone messing with me, a prankster from another floor. When I finally managed to unlock my door, I slipped inside and bolted it immediately, pressing my back against the cold wood. My breaths came in sharp, ragged gasps. I checked the peephole and looked down the hall, but the corridor was completely empty. No one. Not a single sound except the occasional hum of the heaters and the distant click of the building settling. I wanted to tell myself it was over, that I had imagined everything, but then I heard it again, this time inside my room. Just a soft, whispering voice right behind me. "I see you." I spun around, but no one was there. My room was exactly as I had left it. My bed neatly made, my backpack on the desk, the laptop still open with my notes on the screen. Nothing. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping it across the room. The beam landed on the corner by the window and froze me in terror. For a fraction of a second, I thought I saw a shadow crouched there, watching me. It wasn't human exactly. Its proportions were slightly off, too thin, too long. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, leaving nothing but the shadows from the furniture. The night dragged on. Every creak, every sigh of the building, every rustle from the vents felt amplified. I could feel the pressure in the room, like something was watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. My imagination screamed at me, telling me it was the wind, or a mouse, or just stress, but my gut knew better. Around 3 a.m., I finally mustered the courage to get some sleep. I lay on my bed with the lights on, phone in hand, trying to calm my racing heart. I drifted into an uneasy doze, only to be awakened by the sound of breathing. Slow, deep, deliberate. I sat up, eyes scanning the room. Nothing. I could feel a weight pressing into the bed next to me, even though it was empty. By morning, I was exhausted, drained in a way that sleep couldn't fix. I went about my day pretending nothing had happened, but the memory of that whisper haunted me. When I walked past the common areas on my floor, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me, following me. I asked around, but no one else reported anything unusual. A few days later, I noticed a faint imprint on my frosted window. At first, I thought it was condensation, but the marks were unmistakable. A handprint, small but clearly human, pressed into the glass from the outside. I panicked. My door was locked, my window was closed, and the cameras on the hallways showed no one entering or leaving. Moved my bed away from the window and installed extra locks. I left the lights on every night. But even with precautions, I can't shake the feeling that something lingers on my floor, waiting for the hallways to empty, for the right December night to whisper my name again. It's been months, and the whispers have stopped for the most part, but every time I walk down my hall late at night, I feel the cold brush of something unseen against the back of my neck. And when the wind rattles the window or the heater clicks in the night, I swear I hear it, the soft, deliberate whisper of someone or something that knows I'm alone. I no longer walk the hall alone after midnight. And sometimes when the building is silent, I swear I hear footsteps behind me, just slow enough to match mine, just deliberate enough to make me pause, frozen in fear, remembering the voice that called me in the dark and the shadow that crouched just out of sight. To this day, I don't know if it was a person or something else entirely. And I don't think I ever will. The cabin in Pine Hollow. It was supposed to be a relaxing winter getaway. My friends and I rented a remote cabin in Pine Hollow, upstate New York, for the weekend, just a few days to escape the chaos of college and city life. The area was beautiful in December, covered in snow, with the dense pine forest stretching for miles, untouched and silent. I thought it would be cozy, romantic even, with the snow falling outside, the fireplace crackling, and no distractions. I couldn't have been more wrong. We arrived around 8 p.m., the sun long gone, and the sky a deep, dark blue, almost black. The road leading to the cabin was unplowed, a single trail cutting through the forest. We had to park our cars and walk the last half mile, the snow crunching under our boots, the cold biting through our layers. The cabin itself was rustic, wooden walls, a stone fireplace, and creaking floorboards. There was no electricity except a generator we had to start manually, which gave the place an eerie, dimly lit glow. The first night was uneventful. We built a fire, drank hot chocolate, and shared stories. But as midnight approached, I noticed something odd. I was alone in the living room, stretching out on the couch, when I heard a soft tapping at the window. At first, I thought it was a branch swaying in the wind, but the taps were too deliberate, too rhythmic. My pulse quickened. I stared at the frost-covered glass, heart thudding in my chest, and convinced myself it was nothing. Still, the unease settled deep in my stomach. I tried to ignore it. But then I heard it again, a faint voice, carried on the wind. It wasn't shouting, just whispering, almost chanting. I froze. The forest outside was silent, save for the storm. There were no other cabins nearby. My friends were asleep upstairs. I debated going to the window, but my instincts screamed at me not to. I stayed put, every nerve on edge. Around 1:45 a.m., I got up to check the fire in the fireplace. That's when I felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. My skin prickled, my breath quickened, and I could hear my own heartbeat thumping in my ears. I looked around the cabin. Shadows danced along the walls from the flickering flames. I told myself it was just my imagination, but something deep inside told me it wasn't. Then I heard it, footsteps outside the cabin, slow, heavy, crunching in the snow. I froze, listening. My friends were asleep, their doors closed. Whoever, or whatever was outside wasn't making any sound other than the footsteps in the snow. I whispered, "Hello?" My voice barely carried through the thick wooden walls. No response. I debated calling out again, but then I heard a voice clear, calm, deliberate, coming from the forest beyond the cabin. "We've been waiting." My blood ran cold. I couldn't see anyone. There was nothing but trees, snow, and the dim glow of the moon reflecting off the ice-covered branches, my stomach turned. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. Went back upstairs, shaking, and barricaded the door with a chair. I tried to tell my friends what was happening, but they laughed, assuming I was joking, or that the cold had made me imagine things. I stayed awake the rest of the night, sitting by the window, watching the forest. Every now and then, I thought I saw shadows moving between the trees, tall, thin figures that seemed to float rather than walk. They never came closer, just lingered, patient and silent. Around 3:30 a.m., the snowstorm outside intensified. The wind howled through the pines, carrying faint whispers that I could barely make out. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind, but the pattern of the whispers, almost melodic, felt too intentional. My pulse raced, and a sense of panic gripped me. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. The forest seemed alive, watching, waiting for us to slip up. By 4 a.m., I was trembling uncontrollably. My friends were still asleep, oblivious to the terror that gripped me. I debated leaving, venturing into the storm, but I knew the forest was unforgiving, and I would never make it back to the main road in the dark. I had no choice but to wait. When dawn finally arrived, the forest looked normal again, almost peaceful. Snow covered the ground, perfectly smooth, undisturbed. My friends emerged, cheerful and oblivious. I tried to point out the footprints I had seen, or the shadows, but they were gone. No marks in the snow. No indication that anyone or anything had been there. The clearing outside the cabin was pristine, untouched. We left Pine Hollow later that morning, shaken but pretending to laugh it off. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had hallucinated from lack of sleep, maybe the wind had played tricks on me. But the feeling of being watched, the chanting in the forest, and the slow, deliberate footsteps haunted me long after we left. Months later, I found myself driving through a wooded area, and I felt that same sensation, the prickling of my skin, the weight of unseen eyes on my back. I've avoided forests in December ever since, but I still dream of the figures, the whispers, and the patient presence outside that cabin. Sometimes when the wind howls at night, I swear I hear the faint echo of those voices still waiting, patient, as though they've been expecting me all along. I don't know what we encountered that night. I don't know if it was human, supernatural, or something else entirely, and I don't think I ever will. But I do know that some places are not meant to be entered in the dead of winter, and some December nights carry a presence that waits, and watches, and remembers. Even now I can't drive past Pine Hollow without my heart racing. I can't walk alone in the snow without feeling the cold brush of unseen eyes. And every December, when the wind picks up and the night grows long, I remember that night at the cabin, and I shiver not just from the cold, but from the lingering memory that something in the forest is still out there, waiting for the next person foolish enough to enter. The apartment above I've always considered myself a light sleeper. Growing up in a busy city, you learn to tune out the sounds around you, the neighbors yelling, the sirens, the distant hum of traffic. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened in my apartment that December. I live alone in a high-rise apartment building in Boston. It's one of those older buildings with creaky floors and thin walls, but it's quiet most of the time, which is why I like it. I had gotten home late from work that night, around 11:30 p.m., and had barely settled into my routine before I fell asleep. My apartment faces the city skyline, and the faint glow of streetlights filtered through my blinds, casting long shadows across the floor. The December air was biting, and I had the heater on full blast, the warmth barely keeping the chill out. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of heavy footsteps pacing above me. At first, I thought it was normal. Maybe the neighbors were coming home late, or their kids were running around, but the rhythm was wrong. These were slow, deliberate steps, echoing almost methodically above the ceiling. My pulse quickened, and I tried to calm myself. Maybe it was just someone walking to their bedroom. Minutes passed, but the steps continued. They weren't erratic, they weren't even hurried. Just slow, purposeful, almost ritualistic. I called out, "Hey, can you keep it down?" But there was no response. The steps paused briefly, as if someone had stopped, then resumed, even louder now, like the weight above me had increased. My stomach churned. I debated leaving my apartment, but it was December, and the street was icy and empty. My instincts told me to stay put, so I grabbed my phone and sat in the living room, waiting for the noise to stop. But it didn't. By 2:30 a.m., the footsteps were joined by another sound, a soft scratching, like fingernails dragging along the plaster ceiling. I froze, listening. It came intermittently, slow, deliberate, following a rhythm I couldn't understand. My hands were trembling, and sweat had broken out on my forehead despite the heater. I considered calling the police, but I didn't want to seem crazy. I mean, what could I even tell them? That someone or something was pacing and scratching above me, but the neighbors weren't home. I debated calling my upstairs neighbor, but their apartment number had been vacant for weeks. I had checked with the management. No one lived there. Panic started to seep into my chest. I grabbed a baseball bat from under my bed and crouched near the door, heart hammering in my ears. The footsteps paused again. I held my breath. Then, around 3:15 a.m., a faint whisper echoed through the ceiling. Not words I could understand, just a hiss, almost like someone exhaling softly right above me. I whispered back, "Who's there?" and the whisper stopped. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat by the window, lights on, listening to the building settle, to every faint creak, every groan of the old structure. Around 4 a.m., I swear I saw a shadow move along the ceiling above my bed. It wasn't like normal shadows. It was darker, thicker, moving with purpose, stretching and bending unnaturally. I froze, my blood ran cold. I couldn't move. I didn't dare breathe too loudly. When morning finally came, I cautiously peeked out my door. The hallway was empty. I checked the apartment above mine. It was still vacant. Nothing had been disturbed. Nothing had been broken. No sign that anyone had been there. I tried to rationalize its stress, lack of sleep, maybe even a dream, but the memory of that shadow, the whisper, the deliberate scratching stayed with me. I moved my furniture around, reinforced the locks, even installed extra door stoppers. But the feeling didn't leave. Every time I hear a creak from above, my chest tightens. Every time I walk past the empty apartment, my skin crawls. I've tried ignoring it, tried convincing myself it was all in my head, but deep down I know. I wasn't alone that night. Something was there, moving, watching. Weeks later, friends who visited my apartment noticed the cold spots near the ceiling, even though the heat was on. I could feel it, 2 areas where the temperature dropped sharply, like icy fingers, brushing my skin. Sometimes when the apartment was completely quiet, I would hear faint tapping or scratching above me. And every time I would freeze, heart racing, staring at the ceiling, imagining the shadow moving again. I've moved since then, but I still think about that night. Even in new apartments, I find myself checking the ceilings, imagining what could be lurking just out of sight. And I still get nightmares waking up to heavy footsteps, scratching, whispers, and shadows stretching across the ceiling. I don't know if it was a person, a ghost, or something else entirely. But I do know this: the apartment above mine was never empty that December night. And whatever it was, it's patient, waiting, and it hasn't forgotten. The whistling in the woods. I never thought a simple hike could turn into one of the scariest experiences of my life. I'm an avid outdoors person, used to long winter hikes, the quiet of the forest, and the occasional rustle of wildlife. But What happened on December 10th in the forests near Lake Superior made me rethink that confidence. I had planned a solo hike for the weekend. It was mid-December, bitterly cold, with snow covering the trail, the pines heavy with ice. I wanted solitude, a break from the city, and the forest seemed perfect. I left early in the morning, around 8 a.m., fully prepared with extra layers, a thermos of coffee, a backpack with emergency supplies, and my phone fully charged. The trail was familiar. I had hiked it many times before, but something felt different. As soon as I parked, the forest was quieter than usual. Too quiet. Not even the distant call of a bird. The silence pressed down on me like a weight. I started walking, boots crunching through the snow, the only sound my own breathing, and the occasional snap of twigs underfoot. The sun hung low in the sky, barely peeking through the thick pine canopy. As noon approached, I noticed something odd. Faint footprints in the snow. Not animal prints too large, too human. But the strange thing was, they didn't seem to follow a normal path. They meandered, sometimes stopping abruptly, sometimes circling back. I brushed it off, telling myself hikers leave tracks all the time. By 1 p.m., I was deep into the forest. The light was fading faster than usual, and a cold wind picked up, rustling. The branches, that's when I first heard it, a faint whistling. At first, I thought it was the wind blowing through the pine needles, but the melody was too deliberate, almost melodic. It was low, soft, haunting. I froze, straining to listen. The whistling seemed to move with me, always just beyond my line of sight, drifting between the trees. My pulse quickened. "Hello?" I called out, voice trembling slightly. No response. The whistling continued, steady, following me along the trail. I quickened my pace, trying to convince myself it was an animal or a trick of the wind. But the sound had a rhythm, a pattern that felt too intentional, almost like someone was signaling. Guiding me deeper into the forest. Around 2:15 p.m., the sky had turned a dark, ominous gray. Snow began falling lightly, dusting the trail, muffling my footsteps. I realized I had walked further than I intended. The forest now looked unfamiliar, even though I knew the trail well. The whistling was louder now, clearer, almost surrounding. My chest tightened and sweat broke out despite the cold. My instinct screamed to turn back, but I couldn't. The sound seemed to have drawn me in, hypnotic in its cadence. By 2:45 p.m., I stumbled into a small clearing. The snow was deeper here, the pines dense, dark and foreboding. And that's when I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. Tall, thin, wearing a tattered coat that blended into the shadows, its face obscured by a hood. It was whistling softly, hauntingly, exactly the sound I had been following. My breath caught in my throat. I froze, panic rising like bile. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, just continued its eerie melody. I turned to run back toward the trail, but the forest had changed. The trees were too close together. The path I knew disappeared under the snow. Panic set in fully now. My heart raced, my breath came in short, ragged gasps. I ran blindly, hoping to find a marker, anything familiar, but the whistling followed, echoing through the trees, growing louder, more insistent. Around 3 p.m., the forest fell silent for a moment, a natural silence, heavy and suffocating. I stopped to catch my breath, shivering violently, trying to listen. Then I heard it, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching through the snow. They weren't mine. They were following me. I spun around. Nothing, just the thick pines, shadows stretching. Unnaturally. The whistling started again, closer now, almost in my ears. My legs trembled, my hands shaking, and I realized I couldn't see the sky anymore. The canopy was too thick, too oppressive. I stumbled over a tree root, falling hard onto the snow. The whistling stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so complete. It made my ears ring. I looked up, and for the briefest second, I thought I saw the figure hovering just above the ground, impossibly tall and thin, moving in a way no human should. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering, and ran blindly, snow crunching underfoot, branches scraping against my jacket, cutting my arms. Around 3:30 p.m., exhaustion set in. My energy was almost gone, and my mind was clouded with fear and disbelief. I forced myself to stop, trying to listen, to understand where I was. The whistling returned, but now it was different, closer, almost inside my head. I stumbled forward, blindly following the faint light breaking through the trees, until finally, I saw it, the trail. Familiar markers, the small signs I had hiked past countless times. Relief surged, but fear still gripped me. I didn't stop until I reached the parking lot, panting, shaking, soaked in sweat and snow, heart racing like it would burst. When I looked back, the forest looked empty, peaceful, normal. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. There was no figure, no whistling, nothing, just silence. My hands still shook as I started my car and drove off, not daring to look back. I never told anyone exactly what happened. Friends and family would laugh it off, and I didn't want to sound insane. But I know what I heard, what I saw. And I know it was real. Sometimes, even weeks later, when the wind whistles through the trees outside my apartment, I hear that same haunting melody, soft and deliberate, as if the figure is still out there, waiting. I still hike, but never alone. Never in December. And I always listen for the whistling, because it's patient. And it remembers. The elevator that stopped it was a freezing December evening, around 11:50 p.m., when I left my office building in downtown Chicago. I worked late often, and the city streets were usually empty at that hour, lit only by the glow of streetlights reflecting on wet pavement. That night had been particularly grueling, a mountain of reports and endless emails, and all I wanted was to get home, shower, and collapse into bed. I pressed the elevator button and waited. The lobby was empty except for the hum of the overhead, lights and the faint echo of my own footsteps. When the elevator arrived, the doors slid open with a soft ding. I stepped inside, pressing the button for my floor. The elevator moved smoothly at first, the soft whirring sound familiar and comforting. Around the 12th floor, the lights flickered once and then went out. Total darkness engulfed the small cabin. My phone was in my hand, so I turned on the flashlight, sweeping the beam across the walls. Everything looked normal, or at least as normal as a pitch-black elevator can look. I tried to calm myself. Probably just a power surge, I muttered. My pulse was quickening anyway, then the elevator stopped. Not at a floor, not as if it had reached the top or bottom, but completely frozen between floors. The soft hum of the machinery went silent. My stomach twisted, and a cold sweat broke out across my back. I pressed the emergency button. A crackling voice answered, "Building security. Please state your emergency." Before I could speak, the lights flickered back on just for a second, and I saw him. A man standing in the corner of the elevator. Pale, tall, with dark hollow eyes that seemed almost unreal. I jumped back, hitting the wall, and when I turned my flashlight fully on him, he was gone. My hands shook violently. I pressed the emergency button again, voice trembling, but the line was dead. The elevator remained still. I tried pressing the floor buttons repeatedly, hoping for a miracle. Nothing. The small space felt unbearably tight, the air thick, almost suffocating. My breaths came in short, ragged gasps. Every instinct screamed at me to get out, to smash the doors if I had to. But panic made it impossible to think clearly. Around 12:10 a.m., I heard it. A whisper, soft, almost a hiss, coming from the corner of the elevator. "Don't leave." My stomach dropped. I spun around, flashlight sweeping every inch of the cabin. Nothing. Just the cold metal walls, the buttons, the floor. My heart pounded so loudly, I thought it might be audible over the small hum of the elevator. I leaned against the wall, trying to calm myself, and that's when I noticed the reflections in the small mirror panel opposite the buttons. The man was there again, just behind me, pale and expressionless. I turned quickly, flashlight trembling in my hand, and again, he vanished. I felt sick, dizzy, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Around 12:25 a.m., the elevator jolted slightly, making a groaning sound, then remained still. The temperature dropped suddenly, my breath visible in the thin beam of light. I hugged myself, shivering violently, trying to focus. Then I heard footsteps, light, soft, deliberate, moving across the elevator floor. I spun around, but the small cabin was empty. My flashlight flickered. I couldn't explain it. The worst part wasn't the figure, or the whispers, or the footsteps. It was the feeling like someone else was inside with me, invisible, patient, watching my every move. I could feel its presence pressing against me. Heavier than the metal walls, colder than the night outside. I tried to scream, but only a strangled noise escaped. Finally, around 12:45 a.m., the elevator lurched violently and began moving, slowly, floor by floor. I clutched the handrail, shaking, heart hammering, not daring to look around. When it finally reached my floor, the doors slid open. The lobby was empty, silent, normal. No sign that anything had happened. No one else was in the building, and the security desk was empty. I ran to my car and didn't stop driving until I reached my apartment, nearly 20 minutes away. My hands were numb from shaking, my chest tight, my mind racing. I tried to rationalize its stress, exhaustion, imagination, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. Weeks later, I read about a maintenance worker who had died in that building the previous winter. He had been stuck in an elevator shaft during a routine inspection, never found until spring. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Was it him? Was it something else entirely? Even now, months later, I avoid that building. Every time I ride an elevator, especially in older buildings, I check the mirrors, the corners, and I can't shake the feeling that something is always just behind me, patient and waiting, ready to appear the moment I least expect it. The hitchhiker who vanished. It was December 21st, around 11:30 p.m., when I was driving home from a work conference in upstate Vermont. The roads were mostly empty, coated in ice and packed snow, the cold seeping through the car's heater no matter how high I set it. The forest stretched on either side of the highway, dark and silent, except for the occasional rustle of trees in the wind. I was tired, barely able to keep my eyes fully open, when I spotted a figure on the shoulder of the road. A young man, probably in his early 20s, was standing in the snow, thumb out, waving at cars. His coat was dark, hood pulled up, snow clinging to his shoulders. Something about him made me pause, but I also felt a pang of sympathy. It was freezing, late at night, and he could have been stranded. I slowed down, rolled down the window, and called out, "Do you need a ride?" He nodded, stepping closer to the car. "Thanks. I've been walking for a while." I unlocked the passenger door, and he climbed in quickly, brushing snow off. His coat, he smelled faintly of smoke and pine, and I noticed a subtle tremor in his hands. We exchanged the usual small talk, the roads, the weather, how far he had been walking, but something about him felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it. Around 11:50 p.m., we were driving down a particularly dark stretch of highway. The only light came from my headlights reflecting off the snow. I glanced at him, trying to make sense of the unease settling in my chest. His eyes were pale, almost glassy, and he kept staring out the window, silent for long stretches. I tried to ask him questions, but his responses were minimal, almost mechanical. Then, around 12:05 a.m., I noticed something strange. The road behind us had been empty, but now I saw headlights, far off in the distance, following us. I slowed down slightly, and the lights mirrored my speed. My pulse quickened. I called out, "Are you okay?" But he didn't respond. I asked again, and he just shook his head, still staring forward, silent. By 12:15 a.m., the air in the car felt heavy, thick, almost suffocating. I tried to focus on driving, but my hands were clammy on the wheel. The highway seemed endless, the trees pressing in on either side. Then I glanced down at the passenger seat. He wasn't there. I froze, heart hammering. The seat was empty, snow dusting the floor where he had been sitting. My mouth went dry, my mind racing. I slammed on the brakes, spun the car around in a wide, icy arc, and drove back the way we had come, searching the shoulder, the trees, anywhere. Nothing, no footprints. In the snow, no sign he had ever been there. The only thing that remained was the lingering smell, pine and smoke, faint but unmistakable. I drove the rest of the way home in a daze, unable to shake the image of him, pale and silent, the way he had stared straight ahead like he wasn't entirely there. I told a few friends, but they laughed it off. Probably a hallucination, they said. You were tired driving in the snow. But I know what I saw. And I know he was real, or at least he appeared real. Weeks later, I tried to research hitchhiker disappearances along that highway. I found a few stories, mostly old, dating back decades. People walking along the road, vanishing without a trace. Some said the highway had been haunted since a massive snowstorm 50 years ago, when several travelers went missing and were never found. The coincidences were eerie, and I couldn't ignore the feeling that I had encountered something lingering from the past, trapped along that lonely stretch of road. Even now, months later, I avoid driving alone on that highway after dark. I can still feel the chill, the oppressive weight of his presence in the passenger seat. Sometimes when I'm alone in my car late at night, I swear I catch movement in the corner of my eye, a pale figure at the edge of the road, waiting for the next driver, waiting, patient, and I still wonder, who or what did I really pick up that December night? The snow-covered road that disappeared it was December 23rd, around 10:30 p.m., when I decided to take a shortcut through a rural area on my way home from visiting my family. I had driven these roads countless times during the warmer months, but winter transformed the landscape into something unrecognizable. Snow draped over every tree branch, frozen fields stretching endlessly, and a moonless sky that made the night feel heavier and darker than usual. The road was narrow, bordered by dense pine forests that blocked out any light from the nearest town miles away. My headlights cut through the darkness, reflecting off the icy snow and illuminating only a small path ahead. I had been driving for 20 minutes when I noticed the road ahead seemed different. The familiar markers, the old mailbox posts, the curve near the frozen creek were gone. In their place, just endless white, a straight, featureless stretch of road that hadn't existed before, or at least not like this. I slowed down, frowning. Maybe I had missed the turn, or maybe the snow had covered everything. I turned on my hazard lights, thinking of stopping to check my GPS, but my phone had no signal. The forest around me was silent except for the faint hum of my engine and the crunch of snow under the tires. My stomach tightened. Something about the emptiness of this road, the unnatural stillness, set my nerves on edge. Around 11 p.m., I saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. At first, I thought it was a pedestrian, lost in the snowstorm, but as I got closer, my heart began to race. The figure was tall, unnaturally thin, wearing dark clothing that blended into the shadows. Its face was obscured, and it didn't move at all, just stared. I slammed on the brakes, heart hammering, and the figure didn't flinch. I rolled down my window and called out, "Are you okay?" There was no answer. I called again, louder this time, but the figure remained silent, motionless, almost impossibly. Still, I felt an icy chill creep up my spine. The air in the car suddenly felt heavy, suffocating. I could almost feel the presence of something pressing against me from the darkness outside. Around 11:15 p.m., I decided to back up and turn around. My tires spun slightly on the snow, and I realized something terrifying. The road I had come from was gone. No tire tracks, no markers, nothing recognizable. Just endless snow and trees stretching into darkness. Panic set in fully. My pulse raced, and sweat broke out despite the freezing temperature. I slammed the car into drive and pressed the accelerator, hoping to find a familiar path. The figure was still there, silent, watching. I tried to drive around it, but the road seemed to shift subtly, narrowing and twisting in ways that shouldn't be possible. Every time I glanced at the passenger side, I could feel some presence lurking just out of sight, patient and deliberate. I tried calling 911, but there was still no signal. My hands trembled on the wheel, vision blurred from fear. And cold. Around 11:45 p.m., I noticed movement in the trees lining the road. Shadows flitted between the pines, too tall to be deer, too fluid to be human. The crunch of snow on the roadside grew louder, though there was no one there. My chest tightened, and my breathing became shallow. I kept telling myself to stay calm, that I was imagining things, but every instinct screamed that I wasn't alone. By midnight, the air in the car was nearly unbearable. The heater barely warmed my freezing hands. I realized I was driving in circles, the snow-covered road stretching endlessly, the figure still ahead, unchanging, unblinking. I could hear whispers in the wind, faint but deliberate, like a voice, carried through the pines. You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't have come. I tried to shake it off, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. But then I saw something that made my stomach drop. The snow beneath the tires ahead of me was moving. Not sliding or blowing in the wind, but shifting, forming shapes, letters maybe, but impossible to read. The figure raised a hand, pointing directly at me. I slammed on the accelerator, tires spinning, but the road seemed to stretch, lengthen. Trap me. Around 12:15 a.m., I noticed lights in the distance. Hope surged. Maybe it was a farmhouse, maybe the main road. I drove toward them, praying. As I approached, the figure was still there, standing exactly where it had been, staring. But when I drew closer, the lights revealed nothing. No house, no road, just the forest, unbroken, as if the stretch of highway had never existed. I don't know how long I drove, but eventually I found a road I recognized. The snow seemed normal again, the trees back in their familiar positions. The stretch I had traveled in those 45 minutes had vanished entirely, as if it had never existed. My hands were numb, my body shaking, and the smell of pine in. The car seemed stronger, heavier, almost like smoke. I never took that shortcut again. I checked maps repeatedly, retraced the path during daylight, but there was no trace of the road, the figure, or the strange shapes in the snow. Friends laughed at me when I told them, but I know what I saw. I know the road changed that night, even. Now months later, when I drive through forests in December, I can feel the road stretching ahead unnaturally, like it could vanish at any moment, leaving me trapped with the cold, the shadows, and the watching figure. And sometimes, when the wind whistles through the pines, I swear I hear the same deliberate whisper. You shouldn't be here. I still don't know what happened that night, and I don't think I ever will. The snow-covered road that disappeared it was December 23rd, around 10:30 p.m., when I decided to take a shortcut through a rural area on my way home from visiting my family. I had driven these roads countless times during the warmer months, but winter transformed the landscape into something unrecognizable. Snow draped over every tree branch, frozen fields stretching endlessly, and a moonless sky that made the night feel heavier and darker than usual. The road was narrow, bordered by dense pine forests that blocked out any light from the nearest town miles away. My headlights cut through the darkness, reflecting off the icy snow and illuminating only a small path ahead. I had been driving for 20 minutes when I noticed the road ahead seemed different. The familiar markers, the old mailbox posts, the curve near the frozen creek were gone. In their place, just endless white, a straight, featureless stretch of road that hadn't existed before, or at least not like this. I slowed down, frowning. Maybe I had missed the turn, or maybe the snow had covered everything. I turned on my hazard lights, thinking of stopping to check my GPS, but my phone had no signal. The forest around me was silent except for the faint hum of my engine and the crunch of snow under the tires. My stomach tightened. Something about the emptiness of this road, the unnatural stillness, set my nerves on edge. Around 11 p.m., I saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. At first, I thought it was a pedestrian, lost in the snowstorm, but as I got closer, my heart began to race. The figure was tall, unnaturally thin, wearing dark clothing that blended into the shadows. Its face was obscured, and it didn't move at all, just stared. I slammed on the brakes, heart hammering, and the figure didn't flinch. I rolled down my window and called out, "Are you okay?" There was no answer. I called again, louder this time, but the figure remained silent, motionless, almost impossibly. Still, I felt an icy chill creep up my spine. The air in the car suddenly felt heavy, suffocating. I could almost feel the presence of something pressing against me from the darkness outside. Around 11:15 p.m., I decided to back up and turn around. My tires spun slightly on the snow, and I realized something terrifying. The road I had come from was gone. No tire tracks, no markers, nothing recognizable. Just endless snow and trees stretching into darkness. Panic set in fully. My pulse raced, and sweat broke out despite the freezing temperature. I slammed the car into drive and pressed the accelerator, hoping to find a familiar path. The figure was still there, silent, watching. I tried to drive around it, but the road seemed to shift subtly, narrowing and twisting in ways that shouldn't be possible. Every time I glanced at the passenger side, I could feel some presence, lurking just out of sight, patient and deliberate. I tried calling 911, but there was still no signal. My hands trembled on the wheel, vision blurred from fear. And cold. Around 11:45 p.m., I noticed movement in the trees lining the road. Shadows flitted between the pines, too tall to be deer, too fluid to be human. The crunch of snow on the roadside grew louder, though there was no one there. My chest tightened, and my breathing became shallow. I kept telling myself to stay calm, that I was imagining things, but every instinct screamed that I wasn't alone. By midnight, the air in the car was nearly unbearable. The heater barely warmed my freezing hands. I realized I was driving in circles, the snow-covered road stretching endlessly, the figure still ahead, unchanging, unblinking. I could hear whispers in the wind, faint but deliberate, like a voice, carried through the pines. "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't have come." I tried to shake it off, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. But then I saw something that made my stomach drop. The snow beneath the tires ahead of me was moving. Not sliding or blowing in the wind, but shifting, forming shapes, letters maybe, but impossible to read. The figure raised a hand, pointing directly at me. I slammed on the accelerator, tires spinning, but the road seemed to stretch, lengthen. Trap me. Around 12:15 a.m., I noticed lights in the distance. Hope surged. Maybe it was a farmhouse, maybe the main road. I drove toward them, praying. As I approached, the figure was still there, standing exactly where it had been, staring. But when I drew closer, the lights revealed nothing, no house. No road, just the forest, unbroken, as if the stretch of highway had never existed. I don't know how long I drove, but eventually I found a road I recognized. The snow seemed normal again, the trees back in their familiar positions. The stretch I had traveled in those 45 minutes had vanished entirely, as if it had never existed. My hands were numb, my body shaking, and the smell of pine in. The car seemed stronger, heavier, almost like smoke. I never took that shortcut again. I checked maps repeatedly, retraced the path during daylight, but there was no trace of the road, the figure, or the strange shapes in the snow. Friends laughed at me when I told them, but I know what I saw. I know the road changed that night, even. Now months later, when I drive through forests in December, I can feel the road stretching ahead unnaturally, like it could vanish at any moment, leaving me trapped with the cold, the shadows, and the watching figure. And sometimes, when the wind whistles through the pines, I swear I hear the same deliberate whisper, "You shouldn't be here." I still don't know what happened that night, and I don't think I ever will.